Hi, today we have Brian Johnson, the Executive Chairman of Antilles Gold, here with us to share more about a significant progress by the company. Hey Brian, how are you?
I'm fine, Cyprus. Good morning to you in Singapore.
Great. Antilles Gold has just upgraded the mineral resource for its flagship La Demajagua gold-silver deposit in Cuba. Could you give us a highlight of today's upgrade?
Well, certainly. I guess the most important element of it is that the gold resource has increased by 188,000 ounces, which is not insignificant. It's now just under 1 million, and it's over 1 million ounces gold equivalent, if you take into account the silver credits. So it's now a reasonable size mine, obviously not large, but good starting point. And the important thing for us in this additional tonnage and extra gold is the fact that we can extend the mine life from 6 years to 8. And that has a significant difference. And if you add that to the potential of the 10 years going underground, you've now got on your hands an 18-year project with a very low entry price and long-term cash flow.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, and I noticed that, with this increase in, I would say 26% increase in the gold contained for your mineral resources, this will have a significant benefit to your NPV that you put out and probably a multiplier effect there. So now
yes,
that we have...
Yeah, well, it'll actually increase the NPV of the project and obviously our share of that project, of that NPV, by a multiplier bigger than 25%, because in the original NPV and calculation of surplus cash flow, obviously there's a debt repayment at the front end of the project that goes on for 3 or 4 years. And of course, this is at the tail end of the project when there's no debt repayment.
Now that we have hit another milestone, could you tell us how is your DFS progressing and if there's any changes to the plan?
No, it's still on schedule for completion in November this year, my apologies. An important element of the DFS is arranging offtake agreement for the concentrate that we're going to produce. And that's fairly fundamental to completing the DFS. And in fact, you need that to be able to determine it as bankable. So that's the important element that we're working on at the moment. We have commenced negotiation with a major international trading company regarding an offtake agreement, and providing that comes together, that DFS will be finished in November.
Great. Yeah, I noted that in your announcement, you also mentioned that you guys are expecting the first shipment in July of 2024. Could you tell us the rough timeline to that?
Yes, providing the DFS is finished this year, I'm anticipating that project finance will be available mid next year, 2023. But in the interim, we intend to spend our own equity on the project in developing the infrastructure. So in January next year, we'll start building the mining camp, offices, warehouses, site roads, and so forth. And we'll be ready then, providing the funding is in place, and I'm confident about that, to kick off with the mine construction, the primary construction of the mine, in June next year. And it's about a 12-month construction period, quite simple mine. And we should be shipping the first concentrate in about July 2024.
Yeah, and Brian, I noticed you guys have an extensive discussion on the financing part of this project in your announcement. Could you walk us through that?
Certainly. The project total capital cost, including the pre-development expenditure, is around 75 million US. Now, Antilles Gold is contributing 13 million towards that for its equity in the project. So that $13 million, I think we've expended about 8 million to date. We'll finish up maybe 7 million to date. By the end of the year, when the DFS is finished, we'll have spent probably 9. There'll be $4 million left that we have to spend, and we're going to spend that on infrastructure, as I mentioned earlier. Now, from the 75 million, you deduct our 13 million because it's included in the 75, and the $62 million to find. And I just for a little bit of buffer, I'm assuming it'll be 65 million that we will have to find from third parties. And I need to point out, under our joint venture agreement, we have an obligation to use our best endeavours to find this project. We don't have an obligation to provide the finance. Subtle difference. And if in fact we couldn't, for whatever reason, we don't lose our 49% interest in the project or the ore body. There's no termination clause because we can't fund it. We'll get it funded eventually, one way or the other, but I'm very confident we'll get it done in the near term. We're talking to the Chinese suppliers of both our big expenditure item, which is the concentrator, flotation plant, crushing plant, grinding and so on, and also the suppliers of our heavy mining equipment from China. And both of them are prepared to give us deferred payment terms, which is equivalent to a loan, effectively, for about $15 million. And providing China Exim Bank support them, or Chinese insurance company Sinosure support them against our default. And that's progressing, and we have every indication to believe that that will occur. So 15 million of the 65 would come from there. We're planning to lend on a short-term basis, probably only needed for about 12 months, about 15 million ourselves. Now, where will that come from, one will ask. Ideally, it won't come from share placements, but we do have quite a number of options listed, and they expire about April next year. Providing they're in the money, which I really believe they will be, that's probably about 15 million Australian dollars towards that 15 million US. It may mean that we have to do a small placement to get to that 15 million US, and we'll wait and see about that. But I'm very confident we'll be able to round up 15 million one way or another. And then, of course, we're left with about $35 million of project financing. Now, I can't reveal names, but I am in discussions on behalf of the joint venture with several parties who are not affected by US sanctions. And those sort of discussions are advancing. They're waiting on the DFS, obviously, but they've all been copied with our scoping study. They know that the project is potentially solid. Like everybody else, I'm waiting for the offtake agreements to be sorted. That really underpins the project. The project itself is quite simple. So that's basically how we're going to go about it. It's a combination of a loan from us, credit from our suppliers, and a traditional project loan.
Fantastic. That's very exciting to hear. Also, earlier last week, Antilles Gold announced another JV with the Cuban government to explore and develop a copper, zinc, silver mine in Cuba. Could you share with us an overview of this project?
Yes, well, it's one particular deposit within a very large, 40-kilometre long polymetallic belt. It's a VMS-style mineralisation. We're very keen to broaden our operations in Cuba to include battery metals like everybody else, copper and zinc and so forth. Now, this particular property, which is named Antonio, was one of 4 mines that was operated by a Russian mining company. When the Soviet Union was disbanded, effectively, they basically walked out of Cuba and left these mines unattended. They've never been carried on with by the Cubans or anybody else. And we've selected one in particular as our primary focus because it has an inferred resource on it already done by Canadians. And it's quite an interesting mine, this Antonio. It's got an inferred resource that we've published to the ASX, and in a very small tonnage, 2.25 million tonne of surface material in an open pit. There's very valuable both grades and quantum of both copper and zinc. So we see this as almost certainly to be our second project. And the important element of it is it'll be a very low cost operation. I suspect it'll only cost 20 to 25 million US dollars to develop. There's not much to it. Small mining fleet and basically a flotation circuit concentrator. And on that basis, we'd be very pleased to see that the La Demajagua project could probably fund that entirely without going to project finance or even equity requirements. So it's a nice little earner. We'll probably have a life of about 7 years.
That's fantastic, Brian. Seems like you guys have it all planned out before you even acquire it. So what are the next steps here and the timeline that investors can expect?
On the La Demajagua project, firstly, there's DFS that we've spoken about in November. Next most important element will be finalisation of an offtake agreement for the concentrate. And then ultimately, the real kicker to get moving will be financing in place for the project. With respect to the two major properties that we've got in our exploration agreement with our partners in Cuba, we'll start drilling in July next month the El Pilar copper gold porphyry deposit. It's a very large property. It's been nominated by our exploration director as having a potential of 500 million tonne open pit. And obviously, if the drilling from the near surface results that we've got at the moment replicated at depth, we'll have a very interesting project on our hands there. But during this drilling starting in July, we're also drilling the overlying oxide deposit, which has a copper and gold domains sitting on top of the porphyry deposit. And we'll start getting results from all of those elements, the oxide and the underlying porphyry deposit, probably starting to get assays around September, and then I'll go on from there. And that's basically, that property is subject to an initial 2,000 or 3,000 metres just of scout drilling, and then followed by 12,000 metres when we've better identified where those holes should go. After the scout drilling that's done at El Pilar, we're moving the drill rigs to the Antonio property that was subject to the announcement to ASX a few days ago. The Antonio deposit is copper zinc deposit that on which we have an inferred resource at the moment, and that drilling will carry on straight after the El Pilar drilling. So I guess that will be sort of August, September, and we should start to see some results coming through from that. Now that drilling will probably go on, not be scout drilling, because we have an inferred resource. We'll do enough drilling to bring that up to indicated and inferred, and on that basis we'll be able to do a scoping study for it early next year. That hopefully will be our second project.
Thanks, Brian. It was great hearing these exciting updates from you today and a list of news flow to look forward to. Speak again soon. Bye.
Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks, Cyprus. Bye.